Lessons in Excellence, presented by the new 2004 Suzuki Grand Vitara XL7 in association with ILNFS Mutual Fund, more than a fund, a friend. Suzlon Energy, powering a greener tomorrow. And Indian Oil Extra Premium High Octane Petrol, extra mileage, extra savings.
Last episode we saw how specialists are specialists and generalists are generalists. Never the twain shall meet, but sometimes they do.
The game has three players. They are volume-driven, full-line generalists who control 70 to 90% of the market. But it's not easy to be a generalist. Even the third player should have a minimum 10% market share. Compare this with a plethora of other players, the highly profitable, margin-driven product or market specialists, who together hold a market share of about 10%. How do these specialists play in the shadow of the three big players? Here's the story of the specialists.
We've talked quite a bit about the big players. Let's talk a bit about the specialists. Right. In specialists, again, we've got the market specialists and the product specialists. Right. Also, you've made a point which actually stands to intuition, that specialists actually have a very large variable cost within their per unit cost. I mean, that sort of bears itself out. But in terms of specialists, there are two kinds, right? One who offer a very wide range to a specific market, and the others who offer a product across several markets.
Correct.
Is the rule the same for both of them?
Technically, rule is not the same. Generally, we are finding that it's easier for you to be a product specialist than a market specialist.
Right.
Generally.
Intuitively, one would have felt that.
One would felt, because in product specialization, it is your own internal core competency, expertise that you do, that you know is different than somebody else.
Right.
In market specialization, you are looking at an emerging market generally. You used to begin with that one. And then you begin to see if the big boys, the rule of three, are not paying attention to that market.
Right.
And you begin to target that market and hope that that market will grow, and you will ride the coattails of that growth of that market by and large.
But let's take that argument forward. The minute that market grows and becomes somewhat interesting,
correct,
one of the big three is going to bring it on its radar screen. So you are really a mini big three.
Yes.
In a sort of a large fish in a small pond, but when the pond grows, the big fish comes in.
Exactly. And what happens is that you become, surprisingly, what happens is that you look at let's say in a department store like Sears or JCPenney, they have many departments. You'll target one department, let's say toys. And you become a specialist in toys primarily, which is a product specialization, but also it's for children, market specialization.
Let's say Toys R Us.
Toys R Us.
Let's say Toys R Us.
Right. Yes. And you begin to grow that category, but once it becomes big enough, then somebody else is watching you, like Walmart. Today, by the way, Walmart is the largest toy retailer, surpassed even Toys R Us. That's the danger you get into as a market specialist, that if the target market is identified, so how do you protect yourself is the question.
Yeah.
To protect yourself, you have to do a couple of things. First of all, you create more and more market specializations, different segments you target. The best company we have identified is a company in America called The Limited, which began like that. The word limited was, there was an emerging market, late 60s, women were starting to work outside the family, mostly college-educated women. Their needs were not served by the big generalists, essentially, like JCPenney, Montgomery Ward, Sears, etc. This company came from a classroom project at Ohio State University under a professor. And the idea was that here is an emerging market, and they targeted, you know how well defined they were? Young women, 18 to 30, college-educated, fashion-oriented, and they want to be modern. That means they don't want to be like their mothers as homemakers. That was enough.
They went in and stocked products for this demographic.
Right. With the demographic and psychographic or lifestyle. Interestingly, point around here was the following, namely that in that segment, The approach to creating clothing was different because these women wanted to look slim, hence the word the limited.
Oh, that's what
Limited in size of the dress. Then they came out with Limited Express for the teenage girl.
What happened to the limited eventually? Got taken over?
No, Limited still is very large. By the way, the latest one they have done, which is fascinating, they bought a catalog company called Victoria's Secrets, which is intimate apparel for women, and has made it into a successful retail chain. They bought another chain or created called Galleon, which is sporting goods, you know, and made into a retail success. Another target market, lifestyle market essentially.
Right.
And they also, by the way, have one called BRYANT, which is for women who are not so slim.
That's market expansion.
No, that's literal market expansion.
But it's also figurative, isn't it?
Right.
Literal and figurative. But let's Raj, bring this down to positioning and branding. Now you've also said that there are very different strategies for the two of them in this very critical activity of marketing. You've said that the large players, the big three, should really have umbrella brands. Everything should come under that one brand, and that's how they should launch.
Yes, it's not necessarily always one brand, but the basic idea is that you need economies of scale. The whole name of the game on the right side of that curve, or the volume side, is economies of scale. Not just in manufacturing, but also in procurement and also in marketing and branding. And when you have hundreds of brands, when you have brand proliferation, you end up losing a lot of your scale advantage, because each brand has its own advertising budget, has its own cost structure associated with it. And what we have found is that the companies that are able to leverage the corporate brand also in a product brand are the ones that do much better from a cost efficiency viewpoint. And the companies, for example, if you look in the auto industry, what we find is that a company like General Motors in the US that has about 9 or 10 different brands.
Right.
You have Chevrolet, Buick, and Oldsmobile, and Cadillac, and you have Opel, and Vauxhall, and I think Saab is also owned by them, and they've got some companies in Asia as well. That they don't have the same kind of a synergy or the marketing identification. On the other hand, if you look at a company like General Electric, where the GE name and logo appears on every single one of their products, they sell $100 billion worth of products using the GE label. Ford does more or less the same thing. Toyota has a huge advantage because that brand name is on all of their products. So they can build the equity in that one name and have it leveraged across hundreds.
One danger, if you're going to put all your eggs in one basket, one small bad egg, I mean one product launch which goes wrong, doesn't it spoil the whole basket? Does it run the...
You have to be very careful, and any product that carries that brand name has to pass through some very stringent requirements in terms of whether or not it should carry that brand.
And actually this does create the corporate culture to say that you will never either acquire a company or start a business with having some minimum Six Sigma standards of some sort, some quality assurance. Your reputation is at stake.
That's right.
So it makes you not do entrepreneurial crazy things.
Yeah, but let's
more rational approach to doing things.
Presented by the new 2004 Suzuki Grand Vitara XL7 in association with IL&FS Mutual Fund, more than a fund, a friend. Suzlon Energy, powering a greener tomorrow. And Indian Oil Extra Premium High Octane Petrol, extra mileage, extra savings. Presented by the new 2004 Suzuki Grand Vitara XL7 in association with IL&FS Mutual Fund, more than a fund, a friend. Suzlon Energy, powering a greener tomorrow. And Indian Oil Extra Premium High Octane Petrol, extra mileage, extra savings. They rule the markets. Full-line generalists and product or market specialists, but they are different. The full-liners are large, volume-driven, while the specialists are small, niche and profit-driven. This is not all. There are differences galore. With such differences existing, shall the twain ever meet?
the interesting thing that you said about the two is that never the twain shall meet.
Right.
Quoting you completely.
Right.
That don't try and do the two things together.
Right.
Don't try and be a full-line volume player and also be a specialist at the same
Exactly.
time. Are you saying that they'll never meet?
They don't.
They don't meet?
Everybody has tried and failed miserably, interestingly.
What about
and
a GE running a CNBC?
Well, let's talk about that one. CNBC really is a part of NBC. NBC is a part of rule of three in the US between CBS, NBC, ABC.
Okay.
Now Fox has come in as a fourth network, and therefore we are watching which one of the three companies will exit, actually, surprisingly. We see a consolidation taking place, whether it's ABC, whether it's somebody else, we don't know. Now, so NBC actually is a full line generalist.
So you're saying GE, it's not really GE directly running
No.
CNBC,
Correct.
it's GE which really is in the media market a full-line player through NBC.
Exactly.
So you have
And then-
MSNBC and CNBC.
Okay, let me
Right,
turn this
right.
question now. Then NBC,
Right.
a full-line generalist,
Right.
how is it running a specialist like CNBC?
That's the challenge. Exactly right. That when you are a broadcast company, can you also be a cable company? And that's a debate going on right now whether broadcasters can be a cable company. NBC has done a good job, but look at CBS. CBS does not have a cable alternative as yet. Cable is gaining more and more revenues from advertisers. They just surpassed finally the revenue of the cable channels together was just surpassed. So given that, they're all trying to see if they can move with the times.
But why should the twain never meet? Let me
I can
play
tell
the counter advocate.
Yeah, right, okay.
They've got capital.
Yeah.
They've got management expertise.
I can tell you right away why. Very simple. The culture doesn't fit. The culture of a specialist is very different than a generalist.
What?
Yeah, the culture of a specialist is to really be focused, margin driven, not volume driven. So that culture, all the processes around that culture are very different than for the volume driven. Your procurement strategies are different. Biggest cost is procurement. No matter what you do, your strategies are different. If you're a Walmart, it's a very different strategy than if you're a Neiman Marcus, for example. Your supplier relationships are very different. So we are finding culture, processes, and sometimes the infrastructure necessary are totally different, and therefore the two don't. By the way,
You're saying within the same corporate structure, don't try and
they
run
don't
it.
try.
But
Don't try it within the same corporate. But
Correct.
can you? Yeah.
Yes.
Raj,
There's
can you?
one important point there as well,
Yeah.
which is that there are some, I consider CNBC no longer to be a small niche specialist. That is a large sector of the market now. In the US, there are probably 40 to 50 million active investors.
But they grew
that
in
watch
a
that
niche.
market.
So here is
That's right.
here is an
Now, so
example
therefore-
of a generalist
That's
successfully running a niche player.
Although I don't think it was not started by General Electric, it was started by somebody else and then acquired, which is a common route. If you enter a specialty niche which today is tiny, but has potential to grow into something very large, then what it really becomes is sort of an exit strategy, is to say that you grow that specialty and make it a volume-oriented large business. At that point you exit by selling to one of the generalists.
But again, the question that I was asking Jack, if you take it out of this corporate structure, all
Right.
you seem
Good
to be
point.
saying is the corporate structure, the corporate culture doesn't work.
Precisely. And therefore, if you are serious about playing both games, then you should have a holding company at the top. The volume-driven companies are under one group president or a CEO, and the niche companies are totally under different group presidents of CEOs. And the two, let them rival against each other, let them compete against whatever they do, and that's the structure you should have.
Presented by the new 2004 Suzuki Grand Vitara XL7 in association with IL&FS Mutual Fund, more than a fund, a friend. Suzlon Energy, powering a greener tomorrow. And Indian Oil Extra Premium High Octane Petrol, extra mileage, extra savings. Presented by the new 2004 Suzuki Grand Vitara XL7 in association with IL&FS Mutual Fund, more than a fund, a friend. Suzlon Energy, powering a greener tomorrow. And Indian Oil Extra Premium High Octane Petrol, extra mileage, extra savings. The generalists, they are large, volume driven, and thus depend on economies of scale. Their success lies in the ability to maximize the use of their assets, and through synergies like a common corporate overhead which can manage several operations. Generalists tend to dominate several market segments for their line of products. Typically then, generalists use a common brand. They do not organize themselves into different divisions, with the celebrated exception of the biggest full-line generalist in the auto industry.
Raj, when we talk about generalists, you've seen that they really have one corporate function, and then within that a high fixed cost structure in which they run several businesses. Now, generalists in the auto industry seem to fly in the face of that because they are truly divisionalized, while you're saying specialists tend to be divisionalized. How do you resolve that dichotomy?
Actually, the one company that we find that follows that is General Motors. For the most part, the other companies are much more integrated operationally as well as marketing wise and so
Well, even Ford has got so many more divisions.
Ford has acquired a number of high-end brands, and they are in the process of figuring out what to do with them. But General Motors is the classic story, having grown through acquisitions and mergers and having for a variety of reasons decided to keep the separate identities of all of those divisions. GM to the market today really looks like 9 different car companies, not one. Nobody knows, there's no brand equity in General Motors. The brand equity is all in Chevrolet and Opel and so forth.
Are you then saying that, why have they chosen to be against?
Well, that's a historical sort of overhang of, hangover, I guess, from what they did in the past. And it's a big source of disadvantage for General Motors. If you look at the market capitalization of General Motors relative to their revenue, compare that with a company like Toyota, Toyota is probably 10 times as much in terms of the multiples that they're able to get. So that actually is a wrong approach for a generalist to take within a particular business. If you're focused on the auto business, it should really be much more integrated, and you should have common branding, more so than they have been able to do.
Common branding, common
operations, common distribution. Now, if you think about General Motors, in my same town, I've got about 7-8 different General Motors dealers, each fighting tooth and nail with each other, each running full-page ads in the newspapers trying to get you to buy a Buick instead of an Oldsmobile. And every time they run an advertising or marketing campaign for one of those, the brands that get hurt the most are one of their other brands.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Market share, it's cannibalization.
It seems to run in the face, fly in the face of your all your findings. That's that generalists should share distribution, should share fixed costs, should share plants, should share corporate functions.
General Motors is the company that violates most of those, and therefore they have not been doing that well.
But they're not dumb.
They're not dumb, but they've got some historical, some inertia in place. It is very hard, for example, to dismantle that distribution system in the U.S.
Is that right?
Those local dealers have tremendous clout with local congressmen, with state governments, and they've enacted all kinds of laws and legislation. We, in fact, wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal about this, that all of this has to be dismantled because it is standing in the way of efficiency.
And you're saying in market cap terms they get discounting?
Oh, they're hammered.
They're hammered.
Yes, the cost structure is outrageous.
Jack, a question that I've always wanted to ask people like you who study market structures. What about traditional Indian groups, the Tatas and the Birlas? Let's say the two very strong corporate brand equity in India. Now they grew under a time of licensing, so they grew in every area. Now comes new times where the rule of 3 begins to start applying because markets in India have become competitive. What do they do?
Well, again, there's a very classic contrast between the two. Both really began more in the industrial markets, primarily. One more in steel, one more in chemicals in some fashion, especially Aditya Birla Group. Interestingly, while Tata has done a great job of leveraging Tata brand, because Tata stood out for quality assurance at a time in India where it was unorganized sector by and large. There were no industrial corporations of Indian origin. They were all multinationals essentially, and they were able to show in the steel industry as opposed to automobile industry, as opposed to tea, for example, they can provide a quality assurance, they can provide a reputation where people cannot go wrong.
So you're saying even though they went into these businesses very largely because of the licensing regime, they still did a smart thing. They created an overarching brand name.
Umbrella brand name, an overarching corporate umbrella brand name. In the case of Aditya Birla Group, however, the brand names are very different when you go to the cement business, for example, as opposed to some other business brands. They have multiple brands, and they really don't have a corporate identity that begins to rise.
They're trying to do that.
Yeah. By the way, financial world knows Aditya Birla Group probably, but the market world may not know as well. They know Grasim as a brand name, for example. They may know some other brand name by and large. And as they do more and more diversification into, let's say, financial services, mutual funds, etc., this issue is going to become much stronger for them. By the way, the fascinating story outside of India in this particular case, we realized at the time of the breakup of the Bell system, I was involved in that whole activity. AT&T as a brand name was known by less than 10% of the general public, and fully 50% confused it with ITT. Now AT&T was strictly a financial brand, meant only for Wall Street people. Brand was the Bell logo, which went with the baby bells, as we call them by and large. So AT&T had to create a brand new brand, and they created a corporate brand across all of their product categories by and large.
This is something that the Aditya Birla Group is currently caught up in. I mean, because if you look at the sort of portfolio of brands that company has, they've got it in cement, they've got it in apparel, they've got it in insurance, they've got it in mutual funds, but the overarching brand identity. Although one would argue that the Birla,
as a name,
Birla as a name has a brand equity.
Except there is a problem, because you have several Birla groups out there, and each one may have a different reputation.
It's not like the Tatas, there are too many baby Birlas.
Baby Birlas, and just like baby bells, that's a great analog. Each baby bell has a different reputation in America. If you are SBC and a customer of SBC or a supplier of SBC, you have a very different experience than if you are a supplier of, let's say, Bell South, which is a different brand. At one time they all used the same brand names, essentially Bell in some fashion. Now they're distancing themselves from that, by and large. So my view is that I think Birla itself as a name has now multiple connotations. So we have to make sure this is like Aditya Birla Group, as opposed to Birla as a brand name in some fashion. Because in India, one of the biggest problems we have is that we just have no scale with any company. Most of the companies here are small sizes by and large, because the license Raj, pretty much.
And also the small size of the Indian market in lots of areas.
Exactly. Precisely. And then small size of the Indian market itself is still nascent, it's still growing, coming up as a market.
Presented by the new 2004 Suzuki Grand Vitara XL7 in association with IL&FS Mutual Fund, more than a fund, a friend. Suzlon Energy, powering a greener tomorrow. And Indian Oil Extra Premium High Octane Petrol, extra mileage, extra savings.